I think if you just look at a complex problem like climate change through one lens, whether that lens is environment or health or economics, then you get a very monocultural, unidimensional response as a result. Whereas when you bring many different people together to focus on the problem, you get a truly collaborative venture where the sum is much greater than the individual parts. And that's what I think we've seen with this commission, that they have brought together a mass of experience and evidence which simply could not have been done in any other institution.
A year ago, I think I was like Joe Public. I thought that climate change was essentially about having warmer weekends and maybe a little bit more malaria in the world. And I didn't see its health implications as much more than that. And I went to a conference at the Royal College of Physicians about global health and climate change. And it really rang all the alarm bells for me, because I suddenly realised that this is potentially the biggest global health problem of the 21st century.
All the gains that we've seen in global health, improvements in child mortality, improvements in maternal mortality, that we've experienced over the last 20 or 30 years, there's a potential that these could be reversed as a result of climate change.
We've seen the Arctic ice melting. What happens if the glaciers melt that provide water for 1.5 billion population? What happens if the monsoon becomes unstable and the monsoon provides food for nearly 3 billion people? What happens to food production and food security across the world if crop yields go down as peak temperatures rise? Many populations are moving into very vulnerable settlements. The world is urbanizing. Last year we reached the year where, for the first time, there were more people living in urban than rural areas. With all of those effects, and of course they're surrounded by uncertainty, you're going to have effects on populations that may lead to migration and may of course lead to civil conflict.
It was urgent 30 years ago. Now I think I don't think it would be alarmist to say that it's reached emergency proportions in terms of the kind of response we need. Even today, there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who are probably dying, almost certainly living in an undernourished situation as a result of climate change. So it's already affecting the lives of people today. The kind of response we need is going to be much more than what we've currently got on the plate in terms of what politicians are offering.
The first part of the report gives a very bleak picture of the changes that are going to happen and the rapidity of the pace of change. I think, on the other hand, it's a positive report in the sense that it tries to outline some distinct strategies for action.
I think it's never too late to tackle climate change, however late we leave it, because every effort we make to reduce our emissions will save lives. Because what we seem to forget is that we're threatening billions and billions of people's livelihoods in the future. And so if we can reduce climate change now, we'll actually be able to save lives and improve their living conditions.
It's difficult to see how people can simply deny the importance of what we suggested. You know, it makes it very clear that climate change is not an environmental problem. Climate change is a social problem, and part of that is that it's a health problem. It's deeply embedded in all our social structures and poverty and inequality and all the rest of it. I would hope that people will listen, and that's not just people at the top of policy making processes, it's other academics and other policy makers coming together and trying to convince people that they need to take some action.
The key message from the Commission is that so far we have failed to appreciate the scale of the response that society needs to make to climate change. At the moment, we've very much seen climate change through the lens of economics. If we don't invest right now in responding to climate change, we will lose out big time in the medium to long term. But actually, the response needs to go way beyond economics. It includes health, it includes law, it includes engineering, it includes the environment, it includes a range of different sectors in society which so far have not been brought together to provide the appropriate policy response.
The biggest challenge, I think, is the lifestyle change in the north, because we've got to reduce our emissions, we've got to move to a low-carbon lifestyle. And the good news about that is that most things that you would do to have a low-carbon lifestyle would be good for your health. I think there's been a sea change. I think in the last 18 months, there has been a much higher awareness amongst people that this is something that's not going to happen in 100 years' time. It's going to happen in the next 20 years, and it's certainly going to affect the lives of my children and my grandchildren.
I'm convinced that we can respond effectively to climate change. But the question is, how bad does it have to get? How deep does the crisis have to become before we realise that we have to respond? And my concern is that we will not respond until the crisis bites deeper than it is at the moment. The purpose of this report is to alert the world to the fact that we need to respond urgently and now.